You did talk a lot about what attracts our eye. I'm curious if you're thinking about, like my eye as an indie guy might be different than the general public's eye. Like I was talking about when I'm hanging out with my kids' parents. Are you thinking about audience in those ways of, if I do this, what's the audience and how big is that audience?
Okay, so I tend to work on things that visually make me happy. And then if it comes down to logo, how it's going to be incorporated and how it's going to look overall, right? You have to make yourself happy first, right? You can't, in order for you to help people, you need to be healthy so you can help them. In order to make other people happy, you have to be happy first. Same thing with the comic, is you have to make yourself happy first. So no matter what, you have to find that thing. And once you're in that zone, then you can start building off that. But comics are personal, especially when you're doing creator, and they're very personal. Your books are very personal. You're telling a story that you want to tell. It doesn't matter if it's not about you. It doesn't matter what time or what the subject matter is. You're writing it. You're guiding somebody through a story and an adventure, and you want to make sure the thing that made you love it gets across clearly to the person reading it, So I will say, on some level, when you write comics, you're writing them for yourself. Yeah. It's definitely when Amanda and I write Harley Quinn, it's for me and Amanda. We write it for ourselves. We're laughing at it. We're thinking it's funny. And then we put it out there and we hope the audience is on the same page. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes I write stuff, I think it's the best thing, and people just poo-poo it. And then sometimes I write stuff, I'm like, yeah, it's all right. And they're like, oh, this is the best thing I ever read. And I'm like, oh, okay. You don't know, because everybody brings something else to it. So just keep your vision clear and you'll be okay with it. Even if people don't like it, you can just say, they just don't get it.
And
we have to convince ourselves. We have to convince ourselves, otherwise you won't do it. The great thing is that you can keep writing new ones, and some hit and some don't. You learn from your failures. Those are very valuable. Your successes are great, but they give you a false security. Your failures are the things that teach you how to do the thing.
Could you talk a little about projects you own and projects you're working for hire on other people's properties?
Sure.
Because you've done it all.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, if I can make a great living doing just my creator-owned books, that's probably what I would do. I love other people's characters, but there's only so much you get out of them. 4 or 5 years of Harley Quinn, it's great. It became a monster. It #1 Halloween costume, had movies made. But you realize that's not my character. I don't own it. And you realize that when all of a sudden they make animation shows and they don't involve you, and they do a film and you're just invited to see it, even though they're basing everything in the film on something you wrote, you realize that there's a distance. As soon as you're done, now everybody else can take your property and go crazy with it. The money that the least paid actor made in Birds of Prey is more money than I made off it, So that's why it's always good to keep the creator-owned stuff going, because that stuff you can own. I've done Painkiller Jane since the 90s. It had a TV show. It had a 2-hour movie. And recently we're working on putting a film together. That constantly supplements my income, and it allows me to get a couple of bucks here and there to experiment. My Kickstarters are supported by people, so I'm able to roll that money into another Kickstarter. These are much more satisfying, because when you have the success with your own creation, you're the only one responsible. If I have the top-selling Batman book, I always say, well, Batman's always a top seller, and it's great that you're writing Batman, but you're going to be known as a Batman writer, and you're very popular for that year or two you do it, and then you go back into your regular job. Whoever's doing Batman's the most popular right now. That's the reality of Batman, right? That's such a great character. That's real. So you have to do your creator own, and that's when you really know your audience. You get to see people who have like-minded. My audience likes adult books. They like a little nudity. They like a little violence. They like an edge to this stuff. They don't know where it's going to go. That's my audience, you know. And even in my regular books, in the Harley book, I tend to have those elements in there. And then I test the company how much I can get away with, you know. And they constantly shut me down on things, but it's a wonderful relationship of, I want to do this, and they're like, okay, but you can only go this far, and then I go that far, and then they tell me to go back, and you know. But you don't, the greatest satisfaction though is creating something you created and having people celebrate it. I always say cosplaying Painkiller Jane is 1,000 times more exciting to me than Harley Quinn cosplay, you know, because it's personal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you kind of dabble in both pools, just to make sure income's coming in and visibility?
Yes.
What are the advantages to the work for hire?
Well, it is to keep my name out there because the companies invest in me. Also, you know, writing is it's different than drawing, right? Writing you can do quicker. I can write the sentence 10,000 men crossed the desert in 3 seconds. Somebody drawing that is going to have to take like weeks, right? So writing, you can do more than one gig if you can get the work. It's funny because, you know, I've done my creative stuff, and then I have my deadlines for my DC or Marvel work, and I write them down on a calendar. My calendar has big boxes, things are due, you know. But I also put deadlines on my own work, you know, because it's just as important to me. So I do both to keep my name out there, and it helps sell my indie work. You know, 1 out of every 100 fans I get on Harley will try one of my creative books, and that's a great ratio, you know. I think it's hard when you're starting. When I started, nobody knew who I was. I mean, I'd done a ton of things. It was a good 6 years I kept putting out stuff, and they're like, yeah, nobody knows who you are. I go to a convention, I wouldn't even get recognized, right? You know? And, you know, you basically, in comic books, all fame means is you have more work. There really is no, like, they don't, you know, even conventions, they treat the movie stars, they eat in a different room. The comic people eat in a room where the sandwich is in a box. You know, the movie stars have the cook and the, you know, so we're not, only our fans hold us in high regard. Nobody else does. You know, once in a while you'll find an actor that loves a comic person, but it's rare. When's the last time you saw, let's take any of the actors from the Avengers holding up the comics that they were inspired, the characters were inspired by? You don't really see it, you know? So so that's the reality of the business. You want to get popular enough that you have work. Because right now I got to hustle. I just finished the Harley book, so I have no work for Marvel or DC right now. So there's a point I have to call and say, is there anything you're thinking of me? And, you know, it's weird times right now, but at least right away I looked at it as I got a break. Now I can do some other stuff for myself. And this is like a mini vacation. Even though the world is chaos, my brain is in the point where, well, I have time now, I can do some other stuff. Yeah. You know, look, we can sit here and calmly have a conversation. There might be someone on the other side of the fence that's freaking out, watching the news, right? It's just the lens they're looking at the world with, you know, so it's important. And that's what writers do. They look at things with a different lens than most people.
You brought up, and I've seen you post on social media, how we as an industry in comics, it feels like we're ignored a lot of the time. And I've seen you post things like, hey, all you movie people out there, have you read the book that, you know, your movie's based on? And
right.
It felt like you really worked hard trying to point out, you know, hey, there are a lot of comics out there and a lot of great comics, all different subject matter. There's something here for everybody. Yeah. But, you know, how do we get people in to...
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame because a lot of these actors and directors made their fortunes off the characters that were created in comics. And when they don't acknowledge the comics, it upsets me because, let's be honest, it doesn't really cost them a dime to do it. You know, thank God we have somebody like Kevin Smith running around telling people, when I did Marvel Knights and we had Kevin doing Daredevil, Kevin went on TV and started talking about the comic. We need those people out there. It helps. I'm not saying they're going to save the day. I'm just saying the awareness of comics is important. And let's be honest, if you never went into a comic shop, you probably won't go into one. And, and then a lot of people, when I was growing up, comics were in every card store, every candy store. Now they have a little shelf on Walmart and comic stores. So, so it's a different world. People look at it, some people look at it as a dead genre. And I'm like, comics can do things that films and TV can't, this is the only medium like reading where you move at your own speed.
I remember you had posted, movie people, why can't you just read the comic? How difficult is that?
And a couple of them did actually, but mostly producers and directors. You got great guys. There's a couple of great guys, David Mandel, and who's a writer, director, did Veep. Just amazing guy who loves comics, talks about them all the time. James Gunn will get people excited. I mean, he's not only an amazing director, just an amazing guy. Doing Suicide Squad 2 right now, and next Guardians guy. He loves the comics people. And, Margot Robbie taking a picture at the airport holding one of our books goes a long way, street cred. I just love to see more of that. I'm not going to beg them. I asked, and, I got a lot of flack from people telling me, oh, you're out there begging. I'm like, I'm not begging. I'm asking them to do it. I said, I don't know these people personally. Otherwise, I would call them, or I'd say, hey, can you do me a favor tomorrow? Can you hold my just say, hey, I love Black Widow, and I love these comics I read of Black Widow. It's not really that hard. I just think we're always fighting for a tiny bit of real estate comics, and I think people who don't read comics don't understand how much fun they are. So, yeah, so if I can make a little noise, what the hell, people can yell at me a little bit. I don't care. They'll move on. The next headline, they'll forget about me. The thing about the internet and news and all that stuff is, even if you screw up, people eventually move on to other things. So time is a good healer for the internet.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about Hollywood coming calling, either for projects you've worked on that you don't own, or your own personal projects?
Yeah. So the first time I dealt with Hollywood was for Ash back in the 90s. We had DreamWorks approach Joe and I, and we sold them the rights to do an Ash film. They never did it, but we sold it and we got paid. With Painkiller Jane, it was a 2-hour movie on Sci-Fi. We just put out the comic. They grabbed the character right away, made a sci-fi movie, and then they did a 22 one-hour episode show, which I was a producer on, and I actually wrote an episode of it. And then after that, we sold the Pro like 6 times, and they never made it. So Hollywood comes, they put stuff of mine in development. Monolith's been in development. I got checks on the wall because I make copies of the checks because some are like next to nothing, but I make copies just to remind me. We've developed animation stuff, all kinds of stuff. The one thing you got to remember as a comic creator, there's no money in it. And when it is money, it's just quick money, and it's not a lot. We're the least paid people in the process. And anybody doing comics, hunting for TV and movie deals, are going to make probably crappy comics because they're trying to write something for somebody else, not comic audience. But I've had a lot of run-ins. I've had a lot of made friends with people. I go out to California, and there's a whole list of people I go see. I've had lunch with Shane Black, which was like a highlight for me. And, Tom Jane is a buddy, and, I've made friends and stuff, and I love them, but that's a crazy business. You're in California, right?
Yeah, but pretty far from Hollywood. So
okay, yeah, Hollywood's a crazy place because I always say Hollywood will be the last place people leave their houses for this virus because they're all very self-important and they don't want to put themselves out there. It's going to be the last place that people start stepping out. They're going to want people to come in to see them, but they're not going to go out. So I love Hollywood. I do love when people adapt things and, you know, all that stuff, but I don't depend on any of it. I have a manager and I have an entertainment lawyer, and I'm sure they both wish I kept them busier. So all I do is I do my comics and I give them the book, and sometimes they look at it and go, nobody's going to want this. And I'm like, okay, but it's a good comic, you know, so who cares? I think I frustrate some of them, but in the end, it's just another part of the business. But it's very rare to have like a Walking Dead or a, you know, that stuff is so rare in comics. It is like lottery, like Mark Miller, you know, having his deal with Netflix. It's a lottery thing, you know, right place, right time, right property. You know, I could croak and all of a sudden 8 of my properties might become films or TV things, you know, after I'm, you know what I mean? You don't know. But if you're going to depend on it, you're doomed. I do not depend for anything on Hollywood. It's nice when it happens, but I don't depend on them for anything. I know how it works out there. So, yes, that's how I feel about it.
So you're making comics projects, and if someone comes to you about making that into something, you handle it that way. You're not thinking, hey, Painkiller Jane was popular, maybe I could pitch this to Hollywood.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
I'm
not doing that. You know, I did a book with Justin Gray called Random Acts of Violence, and Jay Baruchel. You know who Jay Baruchel is?
No.
So he's like he does How to Train Your Dragon. He does the kid's voice. If you saw the actor, you'd know him. He's in a lot of movies. He does these hockey movies. Anyway, he approached me, and he liked the comic book, and he bought the rights to adapt it, and he shot a movie with Jesse Williams and Jordana Brewster, and they shot this movie in Canada, and Amanda and I went up and saw him shot the movie based on the book, and right now they're looking for a distributor, but that was a fun experience, and they changed the book. You know, they went and did their own thing with the book. I was perfectly fine with them. I love Jay's work, so, and that was fun, and when the movie comes out, it'll be fun to go see it. You know, and it was a fun thing to visit the set and see the stars and hang out for a couple of days. But at the end of the day, I have to go home and get back to work, you know, and that's their life. You know, their life is it. So I'm just trying to stay grounded with that kind of stuff. We went, Amanda and I, it was the end of January. They flew us out to London, and we went to the Birds of Prey premiere. And then we went to the after party, and we met Rosie Perez, and, you know, we saw Margot a couple of times, so Margot knew who we were. So we got to hang out with the whole cast and everything, and it was a blast. And then we go home and get back to work. You know, it makes for a great time, some great photos, and that's the perk. But it's a quick perk. It's a day or two and back to work, you know. So that's the reality of that stuff. People like to live in this fantasy land, and I'm too grounded for that. It's not important. What's important is my wife and my life and my family. The other stuff is stuff. It's great to have stuff once in a while, but it's, you know, I'd rather have a good dinner. You know.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. They say, "Oh, you got this movie made. You must be a millionaire." And I don't want to know numbers, but could you talk about how you know, you make this much from your comics, you make this much from.
So you could be a thousandaire. Okay. $1 million is not a number you're not gonna make that money from a film. If you own licensing and a bunch of stuff, maybe. You know, your average, you get a development deal. Your development deal could be whatever you set it at. It could be $6,000, it could be $60,000. It's in that ballpark, right? And then you get yourself as if you're lucky to get yourself as executive producer, they base that rate on the budget. So it could be $100,000, could be $200,000, maybe. Could be less. They could pay you, decide not to pay you. And then there's a purchase price of the property, which could be anywhere from $50,000 to $400,000. It depends, right? It depends where you are on a totem. Depends how many people want it and fighting over it. If people fighting over it, that's the best problem. But most of the time, it's money. It's so your deal, you'll make your deal, and it's for 2 or 3 years. So over 3 or 4 years, you might make $60,000. And then they don't shoot the movie and eventually get it back. If they shoot the movie, sure, maybe you get a couple of $100,000 over time. that's movie stuff, right? If you hit it big and they make sequels and you have back end, sure, you can make millions, but that doesn't happen too often. More than it's like $100 grand or $200 grand, and you're done. And you realize you probably put more work into it than it was worth, or whatever. Comics, you get a page rate. So if you work for DC or Marvel, you get a page rate. Could be anywhere from $100 to $300, depends who you are, per page. Times that by 22. That's around what you make. That's why comic people write 2 or 3 books a month instead of 1. You work for an indie company, you're talking $50, $75, $100, depends. Whatever you're going to settle for. When you're starting, you take anything. Let's be honest. When you're starting, you just do the work. I've been paid nothing for books because I just wanted to get the work out there. And then royalties are almost non-existent. You have to have a top 10 book, and your book has to usually sell over 60 or 70,000 copies. Not many books sell that much, so I'll make more doing a book on Kickstarter than I would at Marvel or DC, except that I do have to mail out like 1,000 boxes, so that takes me a couple of weeks. So the money in it is, for a penciler, there's more money, right? But they have to be able to do a book a month, It's not a big money thing. You do not see too many rich comic people. If you do, if you could name 4 or 5 rich comic book people, it's usually because they either had a toy company, they're the top guy and sells their original art for a ton of money, they've had some deal, you know what I mean? You can actually look at them and figure out that, okay, it's not from the actual comic. It's from somewhere else they made the money. And then there's the people that enter the game that already had money. So money makes money. You know that. In this world, if you have money, you can make money. So that's, without getting into numbers too much, that's about the ballpark you look at,
Thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just have one question left, and this is
Okay.
maybe 2 questions, but getting back to struggles of being in the industry, I'm curious now, the stature you're at, what you find to be a great struggle for you, and just in your past, something where you were maybe at a different level that you thought, boy, this was really a tough time being a comics creator.
Well, definitely when I started, because I was inking a bunch of books and getting next to no money from little companies like Eternity Comics, and I think I inked a whole book and got $200, like 30-something pages, and it took me a month and a half to do, and I got $200. So I mean that happens. I've always planned for a rainy day, so my struggles were always had a little buffer to them. But when I started writing, when I went from inking to writing, I wasn't getting much work, or they were giving me things that were about to be canceled, and they said, "Hey, you can do an issue." I was happy to get anything because all I wanted to prove is I can do it. I can write it, And when I first struggled, there was a certain amount of editors that were like, "Well, you're an inker. You're not a writer, or you do this." Like, people wanted to put me in a category. And I used to remind them, well, actually, I did my own comics, and I was editor at Marvel Knights. I won an Eisner for editing a comic. But people like to put you in the safe little things, my struggles have been like weird ones. Like, I struggled to be involved with properties of mine being adapted. Jonah Hex got adapted, and I offered my consulting, I offered my writing skills. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to hear. And the movie, got what it deserved on some level. It was not a good movie. All they had to do was get Justin and I to read the screenplay. We would have tweaked it, and that movie would have been so much better, And that's the confidence, right? That's the Brooklyn confidence. I would have made it better. But there are hard times when you're sick, or for me, it's always, the hard times always here. What do I really want? What, slowing down. The problem with rich and famous, or fame and popularity, is it's like a discard. It's like a fake thing, right? It's like, O.J. Simpson's famous for killing somebody, and there's fame. There's fame that's shallow. There's earned fame, which is much better. The people that earn, like the real earners, the guys that really do great work and all this stuff. You notice they're not always the famous people. They're these quiet guys that are controlling. People who, if you, fame is like a really terrible illusion that I'm not a big thing about fame. I just want to be able to write and do my own things. I'll take the money over the fame anyway, any day, because then I can put out my own things. But I've had periods where I just felt like, I ran into stuff like, what am I going to do next? Or what should I be doing next? Or, thank God, later in life, I had them all when I was younger. I had them all in my 20s and 30s. I had all my, like, what am I going to do? Or this book just got canceled. Does that mean nobody's going to hire me now? Because my book got, all these things. Or I'm working so hard on this and nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. Like, I'm going out, I'm going to the cons, I'm putting the books on the table. And with that, you realize that that's like a ladder with like 1,000 steps on it. Like, it's not that you're flying up the ladder, but you are taking a step further each time. And it's not until you turn around and look back to realize how high you got, and that's what it is. So you start and, so starting's always the toughest thing with anything. And so that's it for me. Even when I did self-publishing, Joe and I were like nervous about doing Ash. Like, are we going to eat 60 grand now? We took all our savings and took a risk doing it, but it worked out. I will say I've been very lucky because I have some great people around me. And if you put out a helping and a good vibe and a helping person, it comes back to you. You do good in your life, it comes back to you. Don't do it because you want good things to happen to you. You do it because you believe in doing it. But I find that those people always have a million people that have their back. And the people that are competing and cutthroat and stepping on other people to get their success, they may get their success, but a lot of it at times is shallow, and they're not really enjoying it. So I know I've been lucky. It's a lot of luck and a lot of work smashed together.